Welcome, everyone. Kevin Carpenter here with Ellen Shapiro.
I
I said that right?
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
Okay. And Ellen's got a talk coming up at SwiftCraft, which we have starting here just towards the end of May. If you don't have your tickets yet, you definitely want to head on over there. But Ellen, tell me a bit about yourself. You've been doing iOS development for a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, so I started doing iOS and Android development in about 2010 or so. It was actually like when I first learned to code. So it was definitely a dive directly into the deep end of like I've never really done more than just like messing around with like a WordPress template. Now I'm going to do Objective C in Java. That seems like a great idea. So
Wow.
yeah, it was definitely a dive straight into the deep end, but I really enjoyed it, and it was just something where, I had a whole other career before this working in television production, and, it was something where I had sort of decided, like, "Okay, I can't do this anymore. I'm working terrible hours for terrible people for terrible money, and, like, at least one of those needs to change." So
At least one.
yeah. So it definitely was it was time to change. And yeah, so I just started building stuff, and it was really fun to be sort of on the early side of um iOS development. I will say, like, I thankfully only had to deal with non-automatic reference counting for about the first year or two of my career. That made a big difference for dealing with iOS development because yeah, uh, manual memory management is a lot harder than.
So my main language I do is C++, and
Oh
of
gosh.
course, we've been in
Yep.
we've we've had some publicity lately, but I will say, like, modern C++, the memory management is a lot better. That doesn't change the years and years of code.
Yeah.
It's before the 2011 standard. It was, I mean, you really could not just shoot off your foot. You could take out both legs and a couple hands, and
Yeah.
it was just the par for the course.
Yeah. And it's definitely something where, like, particularly when I started, like, that was still definitely something you could do with Objective C. And you could still do it with Swift, but you really have to try.
Yeah,
And it's definitely something where, I think it is something where sort of more advanced programmers sometimes chafe a little bit at, like, oh, like, hey, why do I have to, like, make this say exactly this and conform to this generic thing? And, why can't I just make it do what I want it to? And then it's just like, yeah, like most people, I always sort of phrase it as like, most people are not as good as you are. And are, they're the idea of like, yes, you sort of have the like, I solemnly swear I know what I'm doing. And then you can sort of,
yes,
uh, find little loopholes for things. But like for the vast majority of programmers, having this kind of safety is helpful not just for them, but for their users.
right,
Just like having the understanding of like when is something potentially going to be null. Having
right,
the understanding of, when is something supposed to be one thing, but actually it's really not that thing.
right.
My wife is a researcher. She does a lot of work with Python, and so there's definitely a lot of times where she's called me over to help look at something, and it's just like, oh yeah, this is trying to like take a string and do an array operation with it, like, and it's just blowing up rather than like telling you what the actual problem is. So
Yes. That's funny you say Python because Python was one of those languages that I literally just started learning this last year. And
hey, you know what?
it's
It's definitely like evolved over the years, and I think that like
Mhm.
there's a lot more, as with any language, and I think C++ is a great example of this, where like any language, people learn from the mistakes that they've made. Um,
Yes, they do.
and uh, they also sort of learn like what seemed like a good idea at the time. And it just there's no way to ever understand completely like what are the ways in which people will foot gun with this. And
Right.
it's something where I think it's interesting to see, in more modern languages like Swift and Kotlin, there's these explicit evolution, um, processes where people can sort of more thoroughly talk through, like, here are the ways I can see this being abused
Yes.
in real life. And those still don't find everything. And it's definitely something where I think that process of sort of everybody talking through, like, okay, what is the advantage of this and what is the disadvantage of this? What are the trade-offs that we're making? Because everything is trade-offs. Like, once you've gone above ones and zeros, everything that you're doing is trade-offs.
Yes. That
Um,
is true.
so it's definitely something where, having a bigger group of people involved in the discussions of what those trade-offs are, I think has been a good thing. But it's
Mhm.
also something where even when there isn't a larger group of people involved in those discussions, the people who uh, uh, I'm trying to say this without saying fuck around and find out. But the people who've made a decision are able to sort of look back on that decision and say, well, that worked out the way we thought it did, or that absolutely did not work out the way we thought it would. So,
Right.
or sometimes some sort of big combination of the two. It's like, well, we thought I was going to do this, and actually, this made this other thing way easier. That's actually really great. But it's definitely something where, like, yeah, having that flexibility is really good. And I think it's been good for people who are learning programming. Like, I
Mhm.
definitely, when I started learning programming, I went through a program at UCLA Extension where it was basically like, so here's what a for loop is.
Right.
And just sort of stuff where it was really, really basic stuff, but
Mhm.
uh you had to really understand, like, the whole thing about, like, oh yeah, you left off a semicolon, so your whole app doesn't work. Like that.
Yeah. Yes.
There's definitely still some of that. There's definitely stuff in Swift, particularly in Swift UI, where it's just like, oh yeah, you like accidentally put an extra period at the end of something. Now the compiler is
Right.
interpreting this as a completely different thing and is just freaking out and going, I don't know what this is, man. Um,
Mhm. Yep.
but yeah, it's definitely, I think until we figure out a way to, like, get computers to actually understand the intention of the person writing code, which
Yeah.
I think is a ways. Um,
Yes, I do too.
I feel like
So,
humans have a hard time with that sometimes too.
yeah, yeah, even we have a hard time managing our own. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's for sure.
yeah,
So, at the conference, you got a talk you're doing called the dating game,
yes.
which
Date and
I
time.
absolutely, yes, because you know, even in C++, we're like, yeah, everybody gets times and dates wrong. And sorry, I
Oh
have to
no.
say I was laughing because even with I was scheduling a kickoff meeting for a conference with ACCU, and it happens to be that Arizona, we never change our clocks.
Yep.
And then of course, not only do we not change our clocks, but then the US changes its time zones, before they do in the UK.
Yep. Yeah, there's
And
a time. So when I was living in the Netherlands back in 2017 to 2019, I called it the zone of international time zone uncertainty.
yes.
Because there's just like the US sort of decoupled what it was gonna do daylight savings from most of the rest of the world. And so now it's just like nobody knows what time it is. Like, you have to consult a computer because
Mhm.
only only something that actually could just, like, physically look up, like, okay, it is this date, it is this location. What is the time zone supposed to be? Um,
Right.
that that stuff gets exhausting. And, like, yeah, especially when you're trying to set up meetings. Like, I was working in Amsterdam, and we were meeting with clients that were in San Francisco. And it was just like, okay, so cool. We're going to be leaving the office, and they are going to be barely dragging themselves out of bed. It's just like,
Yep.
and, like, I can't say I fault them for that. I am very much not a morning person, so it's it's definitely something where it's just like trying to get all that stuff set up is just a complete nightmare. But yeah, so
But this is what you do in your day job with the app that you're working on now, right? I
yes,
mean, to a point,
yeah,
and you
so
have a lot of experience in it.
Yes, I have been bitten directly on the rear end multiple times by this. So there's two apps that I've worked on, including the one that I work on right now, that I've had to deal with date and time stuff a lot. The first one was a parking app called Spot Hero. So the idea is sort of like, oh, we're gonna sell you like a parking space between 6 p.m. and 12 a.m. And because it's not the middle of the day, it's gonna be way cheaper than our normal rate or whatever.
Right.
And dealing with stuff around sort of day turnovers, month turnovers, year turnovers, and then leap years. Leap years are just everyone
Oh,
hates.
wow.
Where it's just like, oh, did you make assumptions that like a certain number of days are not a possible number of days? Oh, now they're possible. Um, and, and that's just dealing with the Gregorian calendar. Like, there are so many different ways that humans have come up with to sort of express, okay, we want to sort of align the way that we think about dates and time with the way that the moon, the sun, or both are working. And like, then trying to align those calendars with other calendars starts to turn into a
Yep.
complete mess. And it's definitely something where it's just sort of like, everyone thinks, they're like, why don't we just all use universal coordinated time, and why don't we just all use your Gregorian calendar, and then everyone get off my lawn, like it's all fine. And it's just like, there are weird things with the way that we understand time that change about once every 400 years.
Yeah.
Or it's one of those things where certain assumptions that are made for extreme amounts of precision are sometimes not correct.
Yeah.
There's I'm actually going to talk a little bit about, there was a story about um, because of, they think it's because of climate change. It's obviously like there's no real way to prove this, but like the rotation of the Earth is actually slowed a tiny fraction, and like there's apparently like 1 or 2 leap seconds that we're just gonna have to not do,
Yep.
because the Earth is just not rotating as fast as it was. And it's just one of those things where, like, that level of insanity is not something that you want to handle on your own in your application. Like, this is
Yeah.
where, particularly on Apple platforms, like looking at like, okay, how has Apple broken up all of these concepts so that
Mhm.
we can sort of try to show what the user wants as the most accurate date. Like, that's something that you can think about. And then you also have to think about, like, what is the most accurate date for what I'm trying to do? Like, am I
Right.
am I actually trying to say, okay, I want to take a specific point in time and show whatever that point in time is at like the time zone for your current date? Or like, what I work on now is a journaling app. Do I want it to just show all the dates in a calendar so that,
Right.
like, like, you have to sort of decouple the idea of the date with the idea of like the time zone. So
Gotcha.
there's there's so many things to think about that, like, if you're not thinking about them correctly, will bite you. And
Mhm.
I think that the biggest thing that I found to help with this is just like testing borders between things is huge.
Right.
Because that's almost always where your assumptions will fall apart. Um,
So,
yeah,
to that end, sorry, not
no,
trying to
go
cut
ahead.
you off, but I want to make sure that the point here is people should be coming to see your talk.
Yes, yes. If you want to learn about, I've done some deep dives into some interesting pieces of like, why is this like this?
Yes.
I'm a very like Wikipedia rabbit hole person where I'm just whenever I'm just like, I don't understand why this is, then I like wind up on the page for like, 4th century AD, Roman emperors or something like that. And you know I feel like some of that stuff is like sort of compressing some of that down into a digestible amount of what
Yep.
of what it is part of what I'm talking about in this talk. And particularly for people who do Apple platform stuff. What I want to do is sort of take
Right.
a little bit of the mystery out of how some of this stuff works and why
Mhm.
it's all broken up
What?
into the pieces that it's broken into. Um,
Gotcha. There was one other thing. Laura Savino told me that you play an instrument, and there's
I do, yeah. I've
and
go ahead.
no, no. So she was telling me that one of the things that she loved was between, that there's a band uh
Yeah.
that you play an instrument in, and she was just telling me how wonderful it was. And so,
It's fun. So she and I have played a bunch of times with James Dempsey, who's a former Apple engineer, and
yep.
for years he actually added songs at the end of his dev talks. And he has continued to make excellent music. And I've sort of referred to him as like Weird Al, but very specifically for developers.
Developers.
And like it's definitely something where some of it is applicable to other types of development, but some of it is like I think I'm very much in terms of comedy stuff. I'm very much like I enjoy things that it's like three people get this, but all three of them think it's hilarious.
You're right.
And it's definitely and I've been doing I've been playing guitar since I was 10. Uh,
Oh, it's awesome.
so that's a large number of years now, and
Yes.
and I used to do a lot of performing and stuff like that, and so for me, like being able to hop up on stage with James and that crew is really fun, and I really really enjoy it.
So everybody should come to SwiftCraft,
Yes,
especially if and they need to come to the dating game.
yes.
And
If you have been fighting with dates and going, why is this so stupid? Like, please come to my talk. I will explain to you why it's so stupid.
all right, Ellen, thank you for your time this morning. I look forward to seeing you in Folkestone
Okay, yeah. See you soon.
starting May 21st.
All right, sounds good. See you
Have a
there.
great day.
All right, yeah, you too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.